The call came on a Thursday morning in February, and I remember thinking it was too cold even for Edmonton. My daughter never called before 9. She knew I was slow in the mornings since the surgery, slow and stiff and needing 2 cups of coffee before I could feel like myself again. So when her number lit up my phone at 7:43, I already knew something was wrong before I even answered. She didn't say hello. She just said, "Dad," and then went quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that fills up with things a person can't figure out how to say. I told her I was listening. She said she was fine. She always says that first, even when she isn't. She said she was fine, but could I come visit soon? She said she missed me. Then she said something about the baby not sleeping well, and how tired she was, and she laughed a little at the end of it, the way people laugh when they're trying to make something sound smaller than it is. But I heard something behind it. I've been her father for 34 years. I know the weight that hides inside her voice when she's carrying something she doesn't think I can handle. I told her I'd come down that weekend. She said there was no need to rush. I booked a bus ticket that afternoon. My name is Leonard, and this is not a story I ever planned to tell. But I think it needs to be told because there are families out there living inside the same quiet nightmare my daughter was living in. And sometimes all a person needs is to know they're not alone, and that it can end differently. My daughter's name is Sophie. She married a man named Darian when she was 28. I didn't dislike him at first. He was charming in that particular way that makes you want to trust a person before you've had enough time to earn it. He worked in property management, drove a nice truck, wore clean shirts. He was good at first impressions. He was very, very good at first impressions. They moved into a townhouse in Calgary about an hour and a half from where I live. They had a son 2 years later. Little Eli just turned 4. Dark curly hair like his mother had when she was small, the same way of tilting his head sideways when he was thinking about something. I visited when I could, every 6 weeks or so, sometimes more. But I noticed things changing slowly, the way you notice the season changing. Not all at once, just a slow dimming. Sophie stopped laughing as easily. She started watching Darian's face before she answered questions, like she was waiting for permission. She wore long sleeves in August. She said she ran cold. I asked her once, directly sitting at her kitchen table while Darian was out with his brother. I looked at her and I said, "Are you okay? And I mean really okay?" She smiled, said she was tired, said motherhood was harder than she expected, said Darian worked long hours and she knew that was stressful for him. I drove home that evening with my chest full of something I couldn't name yet. The morning she called me in February, I think she had been trying to call me for months. She just kept finding reasons not to. When I arrived in Calgary on Saturday, she met me at the door. She looked like someone who had forgotten how to rest. Her face was thinner. She moved carefully, like someone who had learned not to take up too much space in a room. Eli was sitting on the floor behind the couch, not playing, just sitting there with a toy truck he wasn't moving. He looked up at me when I came in. He didn't run over, he just watched me. That broke something in me. A 4-year-old boy who doesn't run to his grandfather, a little boy who has already learned to wait and see. I crouched down and opened my arms and said his name softly. He came to me then, slowly, and I held him for a long time and breathed in the smell of his hair and tried to keep my face from showing what was happening inside me. Sophie made tea. Her hands shook when she poured the water. I asked where Darian was. She said he'd gone to his mother's place for the day. She said it like she was relieved, and she didn't even try to hide it, which told me she was more tired than she realized. We sat at the table. Eli went back to his corner, and I asked her again. No preamble, no softening at first. I just said, "Sophie, what is happening in this house?" She looked at the table for a long time, and then she told me, not everything. I don't think she could have said everything all at once, but enough. She told me about the nights he came home angry and the way she and Eli had learned to read the sound of his truck pulling into the driveway. She told me about the time he grabbed her by the arm, and she had a bruise for 2 weeks. She told me about his mother, a woman named Vera, who called my daughter lazy and ungrateful, and showed up unannounced and rearranged Sophie's kitchen, and told her she didn't deserve a man who worked as hard as Darian. She told me about Darian's younger brother, a man named Scott, who laughed at Sophie's cooking and called her the housewife like it was an insult, and once told Eli his mother was weak. Before she even finished, I had to put my hands flat on the table just to give myself somewhere to put the feeling. That familiar fire. I've had it all my life. Too much feeling, people always said, too quick to react. My ex-wife used to say I felt things at full volume. Maybe she was right, but I was 63 years old, and in 63 years I'd learned something about that fire. I'd learned not to waste it. I asked Sophie if she wanted to leave. She said she didn't know where she'd go. I told her she knew exactly where she'd go. She started crying. She said she was scared. She said Darian had told her nobody would believe her. She said he controlled their joint account and she had almost nothing of her own. She said she thought about calling me so many times, but she didn't want me to do something that would get me in trouble. I reached across the table and held her hand. I told her I wasn't going to do anything foolish. I told her I had a different kind of plan. That was the truth. 32 years working as an insurance adjuster teaches you something. It teaches you how to document. It teaches you how to build a file. It teaches you how to make a case so tight that not a single person in a room can look away from it. I told Sophie I needed a few days. I asked her to let me stay. She said yes. I tell you, if there is something harder than watching your daughter move through her own home like she's afraid of the walls, I have not encountered it. That first evening I watched Darian come through the door, and I watched the way Eli's shoulders went up, just slightly. I watched the way Sophie straightened up and became somebody smaller. I watched Darian look around the room and find something wrong with it immediately. A glass left on the counter. Some music Sophie had on too loud. He didn't yell. He was too smart to yell with me there. He just said things in a particular tone. Quiet. Patient. Like he was explaining something to someone who couldn't quite understand. He shook my hand when he came in, called me Leonard, said it was good to see me. His eyes said something entirely different. That first night I slept on the pull-out couch in the spare room, and I did not sleep at all. What I did was think. By the second day I had started quietly. I asked Sophie to show me any medical appointments, any old text messages, anything she had. She had more than she realized. She had photographs on her phone she'd forgotten about. She had a voice memo she'd accidentally recorded during an argument. She had receipts showing Darian had been withdrawing cash from their joint account in amounts just small enough not to trigger notifications, doing it for 18 months. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from, because I think the story I'm about to tell you might sound like something that happens far away. But it happens in every province. It happens on quiet streets with well-kept lawns. It happens in houses that look, from the outside, just fine. By the third day, I had everything organized into a folder on my laptop. I had contacted a family law lawyer in Calgary. I had spoken to a domestic violence resource coordinator, a woman who told me about my daughter's rights in Alberta with a calm efficiency that made me feel, for the first time in weeks, like there was solid ground somewhere under all of this. On the fourth day, Vera arrived. I had heard about Vera. I was not prepared for Vera. She was a tall woman with silver hair she wore, pulled back tight, and a way of entering a room like she'd already assessed everything wrong with it before she got through the door. She walked in without knocking. She went directly to Sophie's kitchen, opened the refrigerator, made a sound at what she found there. She picked up Eli's boots from the mat by the door and set them aside with a look that communicated everything she thought about how they'd been stored. Then she noticed me at the kitchen table with my laptop and my folder and my coffee. She didn't say hello either. She said, "You're still here." I said yes, I was still there. She said Sophie's place was with her husband and that having her father underfoot didn't help anyone build a marriage. I closed my laptop. I looked at her. I said, Vera, I'm not going anywhere. Something shifted in her eyes. She didn't like that. Scott arrived about an hour later, younger than Darian, louder, with the casual cruelty of someone who has never been asked to account for his words. He went straight to the fridge, took a beer, and sat down in the living room. He called to Eli to come watch something on his phone. When Eli hesitated, Scott said, What, your mom make you scared of everything now? I set down my coffee cup. I said, very quietly, He's not scared of anything. He's 4 years old and he's being careful. There's a difference. Scott looked at me like I'd said something funny. I said, He doesn't come to you unless he wants to. Leave it. The room went still. Vera from the kitchen said, Don't speak to him that way. I said, Vera, you walked into my daughter's home without knocking. I think we've moved past the stage of managing each other's feelings. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Eli was watching me from across the room with his head tilted sideways. And then something small happened that I will not forget for as long as I live. He walked over and stood next to me and leaned his little shoulder against my knee. That was enough. That evening, after Vera and Scott had left and Darian had gone to bed, Sophie and I sat in the kitchen with the lights low and I showed her the folder, the lawyer's contact information, the plan I'd worked out. She looked at it for a long time. She said, Dad, what if it doesn't work? I said, It will work. But more importantly, even if something goes sideways, you will be out of this house, you will have Eli, and you will have me. She was quiet. Then she said, Okay. There's a moment in a long fight when the momentum shifts. You don't always see it coming. The next morning I'd called the family law lawyer, a woman named Dr. Okafor. She preferred that title, and she walked me through the process of documenting financial control as a form of domestic abuse under Alberta law. She told me about the Domestic Violence and Stalking Act. She told me about emergency protection orders. She told me the documentation I had was more than adequate to begin a case. I also called my own bank and a benefits advisor I'd known for years, because here is something that does not get said enough. Financial abuse is the lock on the cage. Take away a woman's access to money, make her dependent, make her afraid she can't survive on her own, and you don't need to yell as often. The fear does the work for you. Sophie had been working part-time at a dental office before Eli was born. Darian had suggested very reasonably and patiently that she stop when the baby came. He would support them. She wouldn't need to work. It was a gift, he said. It was a lock, I said. Dr. Okafor helped us file for an emergency protection order based on the documented incidents of physical abuse. The voice memo was particularly important. The cash withdrawals established financial control. We did all of this while Darian was at work. On the third morning after the lawyer call, Sophie packed 2 bags, one for herself, one for Eli with his truck and his blanket and his bear. We were in my rental car by 8 in the morning. I won't tell you Darian took it quietly. I will tell you that by the time he understood what was happening, there was very little he could legally do. The protection order was in place. The documentation was in the hands of Dr. Okafor. There was a paper trail 18 months long that told a very clear story. He called my phone once. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that started calm and ended less so. His lawyer later sent a letter that was very firm and very expensive and ultimately changed nothing. What I will tell you about Vera is this. She called Sophie 3 times in the first week, alternating between tearful apologies and cold accusations. Sophie didn't answer. I listened to the voicemails with her when she wanted company for it, and I didn't say anything about what I thought of those calls, because Sophie didn't need my opinion. She needed to come to her own conclusions in her own time. She did. Scott texted once to say Sophie was destroying the family. Sophie showed me the text, and she laughed. Not a sad laugh. A real one, startled out of her, like she'd forgotten that some things could just be absurd. I kept that laugh with me for a long time. There are things I wish I had done differently. I wish I had asked harder questions 2 years earlier. I wish I had pressed past the first "I'm fine" and the second one and the third. I am her father. I was supposed to see it sooner. But here is what I have learned about how these things work. The person inside it often cannot see it clearly until something shifts, until some small amount of safety opens up, and then the full picture becomes visible all at once. Sophie wasn't hiding it from me because she didn't trust me. She was hiding it from herself because naming it made it real, and real meant she had to do something about it. And doing something about it was terrifying when you have a 4-year-old and no money of your own. And someone has spent 2 years quietly convincing you that you are not capable of surviving without them. Eli is doing well. He started junior kindergarten in September, in a school 3 blocks from the apartment Sophie rents in northwest Calgary. It has a little park attached to it with a red slide that he has decided is the best thing in the world. He runs to me now when I come through the door. He runs and he puts his arms up and he shouts, "Papa," and I catch him and I hold on. Sophie is working again. The dental office had a part-time position, and they were glad to have her back. She's been speaking with a counselor through a program that was recommended by the resource coordinator. She doesn't talk about Darian much. When she does, she talks about him the way you talk about a storm that has passed, not without feeling, but without fear. The divorce proceedings are slow, as they always are. Dr. Okafor says the financial documentation we gathered means the settlement will likely reflect what was actually taken. I am not a patient man by nature, but I have learned that the law is slow and thorough, and in this case, slow and thorough is working in Sophie's favor. I am still not a perfect man. I still feel everything at full volume. I still have to remind myself sometimes that the first response is not always the right one. But 63 years has given me something that 33 did not. I have learned that the most powerful thing I can do for the people I love is not to react first. It is to think first, build first, protect first, and then act in a way that actually holds. There is a quiet that lives in Sophie's apartment that did not exist in that townhouse. It is not an empty quiet. It is the quiet of a place where nobody has to wait for footsteps, where a little boy can leave his truck in the middle of the floor and nobody comes along and tells him he's in the way, where the refrigerator can have exactly what it has in it and nobody opens the door and makes a sound about it. I go down to visit once a month now, sometimes more if I can swing it. I sleep on a pull-out couch that is not so different from the one in their old spare room, but I sleep on it very differently. Last time I visited, Eli and I built a fort out of sofa cushions and a bed sheet, and we stayed in it for almost 2 hours. He told me the fort was Canada. He told me I was the king of the fort. He told me that monsters were not allowed. I told him he was right about that. Monsters were not allowed, and I meant it for a long time past the game. I don't tell this story because I am proud of how it unfolded. I was afraid too, in my own way. Afraid I had waited too long. Afraid of doing something that would make things worse. Afraid that my daughter had inherited my temper and would refuse my help out of pride, the way I might have once refused it from my own father. I tell it because I have been on enough bus rides home, sitting in the dark with that tight feeling in my chest, telling myself it probably wasn't as bad as it seemed. I tell it because I know how many people reading this have had the same ride, the same feeling, the same quiet argument with themselves about when to say something and how. Say something now. Not loudly if loud isn't safe. Not recklessly if reckless puts someone in danger. But say something, ask the question directly. Stay for the weekend when they say there's no need to rush. Sit at the table and wait. The people who hurt families count on silence. They count on the people watching from the outside telling themselves it's not their place, not their business, not their right. They count on fathers going home when the visits feel uncomfortable. I stopped going home. And for my daughter, for that little boy with his truck and his sideways look and his red slide, I am grateful every single day that I did. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need it. And tell me in the comments, when was the last time someone stayed when you needed them to? I read every one of your messages and I am always glad you're here.